I am Jelena, 28 years old, and I have always been the family disappointment. Despite building a business that secretly supports half my relatives, my mother still introduces me as her child who dropped out of college. Last Christmas dinner, I arrived with expensive gifts and high hopes, only to hear my mother declare, "You are the most useless child we have." The room froze. What happened next changed our family forever. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever felt undervalued by the people who should love you most. Growing up in my family was like living in the shadow of giants. My older brother David was the golden child from day one. He was 3 years older than me, and every milestone he reached became the measuring stick for my own achievements. David was always at the top of his class, captain of the debate team, and seemed to effortlessly excel at everything he touched. When he was accepted to medical school, my parents threw a party that the entire neighborhood attended. They framed his acceptance letter and hung it in our living room, where it remains to this day. My sister Amanda, 2 years my senior, was cut from the same cloth. While not as academically gifted as David, she compensated with fierce determination. She worked harder than anyone I knew, staying up until dawn studying for her LSATs. When she was accepted into law school, another framed letter joined the wall of fame. Amanda now practices family law at a prestigious firm in Boston, and every holiday is filled with stories of her courtroom victories and the importance of her work. Then there was me, Jelena, the youngest. I was creative rather than analytical, passionate rather than methodical. In high school, I maintained decent grades but never reached the top of my class. Instead, I channeled my energy into digital art and online communities. While David dissected frogs and Amanda memorized legal precedents, I taught myself coding and graphic design. My parents never understood my interests. "Computers are for playing games," my mother would say dismissively. Real careers require real degrees. When I enrolled in the state university to study business, my parents accepted it as a compromise, though my mother never failed to mention how David and Amanda had attended Ivy League schools. The breaking point came during my sophomore year. I had already started a small online business selling custom digital artwork, which was beginning to gain traction. When a major opportunity arose to partner with an emerging tech platform, I made the decision to take a gap year. That gap year turned permanent when my business began to flourish. "You are throwing your life away," my mother screamed when I told her I was not returning to college. "No successful person quits education. Look at your brother, look at your sister." My father, usually the quieter parent, joined in. "We did not raise you to be a quitter, Jelena. This internet business is just a phase. You need a real education for a real job." Family gatherings became battlegrounds. Thanksgiving dinner, my 21st year, I still remember vividly. Amanda had just won her first major case, and David had published research in a medical journal. When the conversation turned to me, my mother sighed dramatically. "Jelena is still doing her little online thing," she explained to my aunt. "We are hoping she will come to her senses soon." I tried explaining that my little online thing had just secured a contract with a Fortune 500 company, but nobody seemed interested. My cousin asked if I was just selling stuff on eBay, and everyone laughed. My relationship with my mother was particularly complicated. She had given up a promising career in finance to raise us, a fact she mentioned whenever anyone questioned her expertise on professional matters. Her identity was deeply tied to her children's achievements, which she collected and displayed like trophies. David and Amanda played their parts perfectly, but I was the stubborn piece that refused to fit the puzzle. "Why must you always fight me?" she would ask during our arguments. "Everything I do is for your own good. I know the world better than you do." As I moved into my 20s, I established firmer boundaries. I limited my visits home to major holidays and occasional Sunday dinners. I stopped sharing details about my business, tired of having my accomplishments diminished. When I bought my first car without financial help, my mother asked why I had not consulted her first. When I rented my own apartment, she criticized the neighborhood as not good enough for her daughter. Through it all, I kept trying to earn their respect. I sent thoughtful birthday gifts. I remembered every anniversary and special occasion. I called weekly, despite knowing the conversations would inevitably turn to what I was doing wrong with my life. Part of me still desperately wanted their approval, even as another part recognized I might never receive it. As my business grew, so did the distance between us. My parents continued to introduce me as their daughter who was taking time off from college, as if my 5 years of entrepreneurship were just an extended vacation. At family gatherings, my achievements were footnotes compared to the chapters devoted to David and Amanda's successes. "It is so nice that you have a hobby that pays the bills," my mother said once after I mentioned securing a major international client. The dismissal stung, but I had grown accustomed to the small cuts. They barely bled anymore. What my family did not know was how well my hobby was actually doing. I had decided long ago that if they would not take my work seriously, they did not deserve to know its true impact. This decision would eventually lead us to that fateful Christmas dinner where everything would finally come to a head. What my family never saw were the 18-hour days I put into building my business. After leaving college, I transformed my small freelance design work into a digital marketing agency specializing in helping traditional businesses establish effective online presences. I started with local boutiques and restaurants, creating their websites and managing their social media for modest fees. The first year was brutal. I worked from a tiny studio apartment, sleeping on a futon that doubled as my couch. I ate ramen noodles 4 nights a week to save money, and I tracked every penny that came in or went out. There were months when I questioned my decision, especially when a pipe burst in my apartment building and I had to work from a coffee shop for 2 weeks because I could not afford to relocate. But I persisted. I reinvested nearly every dollar of profit back into the business, upgrading my equipment and software, taking specialized courses to expand my skills, and eventually hiring my first employee, a part-time social media manager named Ryan. The turning point came 18 months in, when a restaurant I had helped establish online was featured in a regional magazine. The owner credited their sudden popularity to their innovative digital strategy. 3 more restaurants from the same area contacted me the following week. 6 months later, I had a team of 5, and we moved into a small office space downtown. By year 3, we had expanded to offer comprehensive digital transformation services for medium-sized businesses across 3 states. I had 15 employees, a proper office, and enough clients to be selective about who we worked with. My personal income had quadrupled since my first year, and I was finally able to build substantial savings. I bought my first home at 25, a modest but beautiful 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing extravagant, but mine. I purchased a new car the same year, paying in full rather than financing. I began making smart investments with the help of a financial advisor, building a portfolio that would secure my future, regardless of business fluctuations. What no one in my family knew was how often they benefited from my success. It began with small things. When my parents mentioned their 20th anniversary, I secretly upgraded their weekend getaway to include a luxury suite and private dining experience. When Amanda passed the bar exam, the expensive watch she received from a grateful client was actually from me, anonymously delivered. Then came the more substantial assistance. 3 years ago, my father called late one night, his voice tight with stress. The family needed $30,000 for emergency home repairs after discovering severe water damage and mold in their basement. Their insurance would only cover a fraction of the cost, and they were considering a second mortgage. Without hesitation, I transferred the full amount to their account the next morning. "We will pay you back as soon as possible," my father promised. "No rush," I replied. They never did repay me, and I never mentioned it. 6 months later, my mother called about a small financial situation. She had accumulated significant credit card debt and was struggling with the interest payments. Another $20,000 disappeared from my savings into her account. Again, no repayment was ever discussed after the initial promise. When my brother David went through a difficult divorce last year, I covered his legal fees, amounting to nearly $15,000. I helped my sister Amanda with the down payment on her condo. When my niece Rebecca needed braces that were not fully covered by insurance, I quietly paid the $4,000 difference. The largest expense came when my parents mentioned they had always dreamed of visiting Europe for their 40th anniversary, but could not afford it with retirement approaching. I arranged and fully funded a 3-week tour of France, Italy, and Spain, complete with luxury accommodations and private guided tours. The trip cost over $40,000, but their joy in the photos they sent made every penny worthwhile. Through all of this, I never advertised my financial contributions to the extended family. My parents presented these experiences and solutions as their own achievements or lucky breaks. The narrative remained that David and Amanda were the successful children while I was still finding my way with my internet job. Last September, my mother called again. Her voice had the familiar tone that I had come to recognize as the prelude to a financial request. "Jelena, darling, I hate to ask this, but your father and I are considering renovating the kitchen. Nothing fancy, just updating the appliances and countertops." The quote we got was a bit higher than expected. I transferred $25,000 before she even finished explaining. She thanked me profusely, promising to show me every receipt and return any unused funds. Neither of those things happened. 2 months later, my parents posted photos of their dream kitchen renovation on social media, thanking years of careful saving for making it possible. My aunt commented about how wonderfully successful my parents were to afford such luxury, while my mother replied with false modesty about making sacrifices for the things that matter. I said nothing. I had long ago accepted that my contributions would remain invisible, just like my professional success. What I did not realize was how this pattern had affected me, building a reservoir of resentment that was slowly approaching its breaking point. The Christmas dinner was approaching, and with it, another opportunity for my family to minimize my existence while benefiting from its fruits. What they did not know was that this year would be different. This year, I had finally reached my limit. The invitation to Christmas dinner came via my mother's annual group text, "Family dinner at 6 p.m. sharp. Dress appropriately. Let me know if you are bringing anyone. No warmth, no personal touch, just logistics." Still, I replied with an enthusiastic, "Looking forward to it," complete with a Christmas tree emoji that went unacknowledged. Despite everything, part of me still craved that magical Christmas experience where I would finally feel like a valued member of the family. Each year, I convinced myself that this time would be different. This year, I decided to go all out with the gifts, as if expensive presents could finally buy the recognition I had never received. For my father, I found a rare first edition of his favorite author's most celebrated work, professionally restored and preserved. For my mother, I commissioned a custom-designed diamond necklace featuring birthstones representing each family member. For David, I secured tickets to a medical conference in Switzerland he had mentioned wanting to attend. For Amanda, I found a vintage briefcase from a prestigious French leather goods manufacturer, the same one used by a Supreme Court justice she admired. I spent hours selecting and wrapping each gift using premium paper and handcrafted bows. I wrote heartfelt cards expressing specific things I admired about each family member. The total cost exceeded $5,000, but I told myself it was an investment in our relationship. The morning of Christmas Eve, I stood in front of my closet contemplating what dress appropriately meant to my mother. I finally selected a conservative burgundy dress that hit just below the knee, paired with modest heels and subtle jewelry. Professional enough to be taken seriously, but festive enough for the holiday. I spent extra time on my hair and makeup, aiming for the polished look my mother always praised in Amanda. As I prepared, my phone rang. It was Rachel, my best friend since high school, and one of the few people who truly understood my family dynamic. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked after I detailed my gift plans. "Last year you came home in tears after your mom asked when you were going to get a career instead of playing on the internet." I know, I sighed, applying mascara with my free hand. "But they are still my family, and it is Christmas." "Just remember your boundaries," Rachel advised. "You have prepared some responses for the inevitable comments, right?" We spent the next 20 minutes role-playing potential scenarios. Rachel took particular delight in playing my mother, nailing her passive-aggressive tone perfectly. "So, Jelena, are you still doing that website thing?" she asked in my mother's dismissive voice. "Yes, and we just signed our 100th client," I practiced responding. "Our annual revenue exceeded $2 million this year. But do not you think you would be more fulfilled with a traditional career path? I find building a company that employs 23 people and solves real business problems incredibly fulfilling, actually." We went through several variations with Rachel, helping me refine answers that were confident but not confrontational. By the end of the call, I felt more prepared, though the familiar knot of anxiety remained in my stomach. "Remember," Rachel said before hanging up, "you are allowed to leave if it becomes too much. Your car works, gas is in the tank, and my guest room is always available." I promised to text her updates throughout the evening and set off for the 90-minute drive to my parents' suburban home. The route was familiar each mile, bringing a mixture of nostalgia and dread. I passed my old high school, the park where I had my first kiss, the diner where I used to study late into the night. The radio played Christmas classics, and I sang along trying to cultivate the holiday spirit. As I drove, I rehearsed more scenarios in my head. I imagined impressing everyone with stories of my business success. I pictured my mother finally saying she was proud of me. I envisioned a warm, loving exchange of gifts and genuine conversation. The rational part of me knew these fantasies were unlikely, but hope persisted despite all evidence to the contrary. I pulled up to my parents' two-story colonial at exactly 5:45 p.m. The house was impeccably decorated as always. Strings of white lights outlined the roof and windows. A professional-looking wreath hung on the front door. Through the bay window, I could see the perfectly trimmed Christmas tree surrounded by color-coordinated presents. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my gifts from the trunk and approached the front door. Before I could knock, it swung open to reveal my mother dressed in a designer outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Jelena, you are early," she said, giving me a quick air kiss near my cheek. "Everyone else is already here. Your brother brought his new girlfriend. She is a surgical resident." And just like that, before I had even stepped fully into the house, I was already being reminded of the family hierarchy. I forced a smile and stepped inside, telling myself that this year would be different. This year I would not let them diminish me. I had no idea how prophetic that resolution would prove to be. The dining room looked like something from a holiday magazine spread. The table was set with my grandmother's fine china crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier above. A centerpiece of pine branches, cranberries, and white candles ran down the middle of the table. Place cards in my mother's elegant handwriting marked each person's assigned seat. I noticed immediately that I was positioned at the far end of the table next to my 7-year-old niece and across from my elderly aunt who was hard of hearing. The prime positions near my parents were occupied by David and his new girlfriend Melissa, along with Amanda and her husband James. The seating arrangement spoke volumes about the family hierarchy. "Jelena, come meet Melissa," my brother called out as I entered. She just matched with Massachusetts General for her residency program. Melissa was tall, blonde, and wore a tasteful cashmere sweater. She shook my hand firmly while David beamed beside her. "David tells me you do something with websites," she asked. Before I could answer, my mother interjected. "Jelena helps small businesses with their internet presence. Now, Melissa, tell everyone about that fascinating surgery you observed last week." And just like that, my introduction was complete, and the conversation moved on. I took my assigned seat, accepting a glass of wine from my father, who patted my shoulder absent-mindedly before returning to the kitchen. Dinner began with my mother's traditional Christmas Eve bouillabaisse, followed by roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, a nod to our supposed English heritage 3 generations removed. The food was excellent as always. My mother may have had many flaws, but culinary skill was not among them. As we ate, the conversation followed its usual pattern. David described a complex diagnosis he had made that his attending physician had missed. Amanda recounted her latest courtroom victory, securing a favorable settlement for her client in a high-profile divorce case. My father discussed his recent promotion at the engineering firm where he had worked for 30 years. "So, Amanda," my mother said, refilling her wine glass for the 3rd time, James mentioned, "you are being considered for partnership at the firm." Amanda nodded, trying to appear modest, but failing to hide her pride. "The committee meets in January, but the senior partners have been dropping hints. I am the youngest attorney ever to be considered." "That is our girl," my father beamed. "Always breaking barriers." My mother turned to David, "And I understand the chief of surgery personally requested you for his research team." David nodded his arm around Melissa. "It is a 2-year project, studying innovative approaches to cardiac rehabilitation. Very competitive selection process." "David was chosen from among 40 applicants," Melissa added, gazing adoringly at my brother. "Well," my mother said, raising her glass to our brilliant children and their extraordinary achievements. Everyone clinked glasses enthusiastically. I noticed my mother's eyes skipped over me as she made the toast. When the dinner conversation eventually turned my way, it was with the energy of an obligation being fulfilled. "And what about you, Jelena?" my aunt asked loudly from across the table. "Still doing your computer stuff?" All eyes turned to me with polite but disinterested expressions. I took a breath, determined to represent my work accurately. "Actually, my agency has had an incredible year," I began. "We have expanded into 3 new states and hired 11 new employees." We recently signed a contract with a major national retailer to overhaul their entire digital presence. There was a brief pause. Then my mother said, "That is nice, dear. Did I mention that David's research received a grant from the National Institutes of Health?" My father, perhaps sensing my disappointment, made an effort. "So this website business is going well then?" "It is not just websites, Dad," I explained. "We provide comprehensive digital transformation services. We help established businesses compete in the digital marketplace through strategic planning, content creation, technical implementation, and data analysis." My brother's girlfriend looked confused. "So you make Facebook pages for shops?" Everyone chuckled, including my parents. My cheeks burned. "Not exactly," I said. "For example, we recently helped a 70-year-old family business increase their revenue by 40% by developing an e-commerce platform that expanded their market from local to national." Speaking of education, my mother interrupted, clearly not having listened to a word. "I said Melissa was top of her class at Johns Hopkins. Such a prestigious institution." The conversation shifted away from me once again, and I fell silent, pushing food around my plate. The familiar feeling of invisibility settled over me like a heavy blanket. As dinner progressed, the wine flowed freely, especially for my mother. Her cheeks grew flushed, and her comments became increasingly unfiltered. When the dessert, a traditional Yule log cake, was served, she was on her fifth glass. "Jelena," she said suddenly, her voice carrying across the table and halting other conversations. "I was speaking with Diane Thompson last week. You remember her, James's mother. She mentioned that the community college has an excellent program for business administration. You could finally finish your degree." The table grew uncomfortably quiet. "Mom, I do not need a business degree," I replied evenly. "My company is doing very well. But imagine how much better it could do if you had proper credentials," she pressed. "Or perhaps you could consider an MBA from a reputable institution. It is never too late to get serious about your future." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. I am serious about my future. I have built a successful business from the ground up. My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Playing around on Instagram is hardly building a business, darling." David shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I am sure Jelena's work is more complex than that." "Of course it is," my mother said, her tone making it clear she believed the opposite. "But there is nothing wrong with wanting more for your children. Amanda and David have such impressive careers. Real careers with credentials and respect." "My career is real," I said, my voice low but firm. "Hobby, career, whatever you want to call it," my mother continued, taking another sip of wine. "The point is, there are still opportunities for you to make something substantial of yourself." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. My father cleared his throat. "Margaret, perhaps we should move on to opening presents." But my mother was not finished. She fixed me with a look I had seen countless times, a mixture of disappointment and judgment. "I just do not understand why you insist on taking the path of least resistance. Your brother and sister worked hard for their accomplishments. They did not quit when things got difficult." "I did not quit," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I made a strategic decision to pursue an opportunity." "An opportunity to avoid real work?" my mother scoffed. "You know what Diane's daughter is doing. She just made partner at her accounting firm, and Richard's son just got his doctorate in economics. Meanwhile, you are still playing entrepreneur, without even basic qualifications." Each word hit like a physical blow. Years of similar comments flashed through my mind, a lifetime of being measured and found wanting. My mother raised her glass again, her words slightly slurred. "I suppose every family has one, don't they? You are the most useless child we have." The room went completely silent. My niece's fork clattered against her plate. Amanda gasped softly. David stared at his plate, unable to meet anyone's eyes. My father reached for my mother's arm, but she pulled away. Something broke inside me at that moment. Not in a destructive way, but like a dam finally giving way to pressure that had built up for years. With surprising calmness, I placed my napkin beside my plate and stood. "Then stop calling me when you need money," I said clearly. My mother's face fell, the color draining visibly, even through her wine flush. Everyone at the table stopped breathing, frozen, in the moment of revelation. "What are you talking about?" my mother finally whispered. But there was no going back now. The truth so long submerged was finally rising to the surface. The silence that followed my statement seemed to stretch for an eternity. My father was the first to recover his face, a mixture of shock and growing alarm. "Jelena, that is not appropriate dinner conversation," he said weakly, clearly trying to halt what he sensed was coming. "I think it is exactly appropriate," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "If we are going to discuss my contributions to this family, let us be thorough." My mother's expression hardened as she attempted to regain control of the situation. "I do not know what you are implying, but if you are referring to the occasional small loan between family members, that is hardly relevant to your career choices." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Small loans. Is that what we are calling them now?" David looked confused, glancing between our mother and me. "What loans?" I turned to face my brother directly. "Did you know that I paid for the renovations on the basement last year? $30,000? David's eyes widened. "I thought Dad got a bonus at work." "There was no bonus," I said. "Just like there were no years of careful saving for the kitchen renovation that cost $25,000, or the European vacation for their anniversary that cost over $40,000. Amanda set down her wine glass with a sharp click against the table. "Mom, is this true?" My mother's face flushed deeper, but now from anger rather than wine. "This is ridiculous. Your father and I have occasionally asked Jelena for temporary assistance during cash flow issues. That is what family does for each other." "Temporary assistance," I repeated. Interesting term for money that was never repaid or even acknowledged. My father looked genuinely remorseful. "Jelena, we always intended to pay you back for those things, but with property taxes and insurance increases." "I do not care about the money," I interrupted. "What I care about is the hypocrisy. You have been taking my money for years while simultaneously treating me like the family failure." I turned back to my siblings. "And it is not just Mom and Dad. David, who do you think covered your legal fees during your divorce last year?" My brother's mouth fell open. "The firm offered a professional courtesy discount." "There was no discount. I paid $15,000 directly to your attorney." Amanda looked stricken. "The down payment assistance for my condo, $20,000, I confirmed, and Rebecca's braces $4,000 that insurance would not cover." My niece looked up at the mention of her name, her young face confused by the adult tension surrounding her. "But how could you afford all that?" David asked, genuinely perplexed. "I thought your business was just small scale." "Because contrary to what you have all been told, my little online thing is actually a highly successful digital marketing agency with 23 full-time employees and annual revenue exceeding $2 million last year." The shock on their faces would have been comical under different circumstances. "2 million, my father repeated, his voice faint. "Gross revenue, not all profit, of course," I clarified. "But yes, we work with over 100 clients across 7 states, including several Fortune 500 companies. I own commercial office space downtown and have been featured in Business Insider and Forbes." Amanda shook her head in disbelief. "But you never said anything." "Would it have mattered?" I asked. Every time I tried to talk about my work, the subject was changed or minimized. Mom once called it my little hobby right after I signed a contract worth $300,000. My mother had been uncharacteristically quiet, her fingers gripping her wine glass so tightly I worried it might shatter. Finally, she spoke, her voice brittle. "If your business is so successful, why did not you finish your degree? Education is still important." Even now, she could not acknowledge the truth. Something inside me softened slightly, recognizing the fear behind her rigidity. "Because I did not need it, Mom. Some of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world do not have college degrees. What I needed was practical experience and the freedom to innovate without academic constraints." My father rubbed his face with his hands. "Why did not you tell us how well you were doing?" "I tried dozens of times, but no one was interested. It was easier to maintain the family narrative: David the doctor, Amanda the lawyer, and Jelena the dropout." Melissa, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "I think what you have accomplished sounds incredibly impressive, Jelena. Building a company from nothing takes extraordinary skill and determination." I nodded gratefully in her direction. At least someone at the table could acknowledge reality. My uncle cleared his throat. Jelena also helped me with my medical bills last year. Paid for the specialist consultations insurance would not cover. This was news to everyone at the table, including me, my uncle continued. She swore me to secrecy, said it was between us. But I cannot sit here and listen to this without saying something. She is one of the most generous people I know. One by one, other family members began speaking up. My cousin admitted that I had paid for her emergency car repair when she was between jobs. My aunt revealed that I had funded her cataract surgery. Even my young niece piped up Aunt Jelena buys all my books for school and never tells mommy. As the revelations continued, my mother's face grew increasingly pale. The carefully constructed narrative she had maintained for years was crumbling before her eyes. "Why would you do all this in secret?" she finally asked, her voice small. "Because you made it clear that nothing I did would ever be good enough," I answered honestly. "So I stopped trying to prove myself to you and just did what I thought was right." David looked at me with new eyes. "All this time we had no idea." "That was the point," I said. "I did not want gratitude or recognition. I just wanted to help the people I love without having to fight for respect in return." My father, who had been quietly absorbing everything, finally spoke up. "Jelena, I owe you an apology. We all do. We have been unfair to you for years, judging your choices by our own limited understanding of success." Amanda nodded in agreement. "I have been so focused on traditional markers of achievement that I completely missed what you were building. I am sorry." Their words were validating, but the person I most needed to hear from remained silent. My mother stared down at her plate, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Mom," I prompted gently. She looked up, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. My mother never cried, at least not in front of others. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. The proud, certain woman who had dominated our family dynamic for decades suddenly looked lost. And with that vulnerable admission, we moved into the next phase of our family reckoning. "I can tell you what I needed to hear," I said, my voice gentler now. "I needed to hear that my path had value even if it was different from what you imagined for me. I needed to know that you were proud of me for creating something meaningful, not despite dropping out of college, but because of what I built afterward." My mother wiped at her eyes, careful not to smudge her makeup even in this emotional moment. "I never meant to make you feel less than." "But you did," I replied. Every dismissive comment about my internet job, every change of subject, when I tried to share my success, every comparison to David and Amanda, it all sent a clear message that I was the disappointment, the one who had failed to meet expectations. My father reached across the table, his hand extended toward me. "We were wrong, Jelena. Completely wrong." I appreciated his candor but kept my focus on my mother. She was the emotional center of our family, and without her acknowledgement, any reconciliation would be incomplete. "I was trying to protect you," she finally said. "The world can be cruel to people without credentials. I did not want you to struggle." "But I was not struggling," I pointed out. "I was thriving. You just could not see it because it did not fit your definition of success." David, who had been quietly processing everything, spoke up. "Mom, I think we need to acknowledge something important here. Jelena has not just succeeded on her own terms. She has been financially supporting half the family while we continued to treat her as if she needed guidance." Amanda nodded vigorously. "The irony is staggering when you think about it. We have been acting superior while literally taking money from her." My mother flinched at Amanda's blunt assessment. "I never thought of it that way." "That is the problem," I said. "You never had to think about it because the family narrative was so deeply entrenched. David and Amanda were the successful ones, and I was the work in progress. That story was comfortable for everyone, so no one questioned it, even as evidence to the contrary piled up." Tears began rolling down my mother's cheeks in earnest now. "I am so ashamed," she whispered. Her vulnerability cracked something open in me. This was not the confident, judgmental mother I had grown accustomed to battling. This was a woman facing the consequences of her assumptions and finding them devastating. "I do not want you to be ashamed," I said truthfully. "I just want you to see me, really see me, for who I am and what I have accomplished." My mother nodded, dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. "I understand now why you kept your success private. We gave you no reason to share it." "There is something else you should know," my father interjected, looking at my mother with an expression I could not quite read. Something that might help explain, though not excuse, your mother's fixation on traditional education and career paths. My mother shot him a warning look, but he continued. Your mother was offered a scholarship to business school before we were married. She had entrepreneurial dreams of her own, but her parents insisted that a proper young woman should focus on family rather than business. When she met me, her parents saw an opportunity for her to fulfill what they considered the appropriate role for a woman of her generation. This was entirely new information to me. I looked at my mother with fresh eyes. You wanted to be an entrepreneur? She nodded reluctantly. I had plans for a chain of specialized boutiques. I had the business plan written out, market research completed. But my father refused to support me, and in those days a woman needed a male cosigner for any significant business loan. She sighed. It was a different time. So instead you channeled those ambitions into your children, I realized aloud. I wanted you all to have the opportunities I was denied, she admitted. But I was fixated on the traditional paths that came with external validation degrees and titles that no one could question. And when I chose a path that reminded you of your abandoned dream, I began. I was terrified for you, she finished. And perhaps, though I am only realizing this now, a little jealous that you had the courage to do what I could not. The revelation hung in the air between us, reshaping my understanding of our relationship. My mother's criticism suddenly appeared not as judgments of my inadequacy, but as projections of her own regrets and fears. Mom, I said softly, it is not too late, you know. Many successful businesses are started by people in their 50s and 60s. Your experience and wisdom would be valuable assets. A small, sad smile crossed her face. That time has passed for me. But I can still learn to appreciate the path you have chosen, even if I could not take it myself. David cleared his throat. I think we all owe Jelena more than just apologies. We need to change how this family operates going forward. Amanda nodded. No more dismissing Jelena's work or achievements. No more pretending her financial contributions do not exist. And definitely no more family narrative that puts some of us above others. And repayment, my father added firmly. We need to discuss a plan to repay the money Jelena has given us over the years. I shook my head. The money was never the issue. I gave it freely without expectation of repayment. What I could not afford was the continued emotional cost of being treated as less than while providing that support. Still, my father insisted we cannot move forward with integrity without addressing the financial aspect. What I want is respect, I said clearly. I want my professional accomplishments acknowledged as equal to David's and Amanda's. I want to be able to share my successes without having the subject changed. I want to be introduced as our daughter, the successful entrepreneur, rather than our daughter who left college. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. Her palm was warm against mine, and I could feel a slight tremor in her fingers. I promise to do better, she said, her voice stronger now. I cannot change the past, but I can change how I behave going forward. Your business is remarkable, Jelena. You are remarkable. And I am so sorry that I failed to see that. The sincerity in her eyes told me more than her words. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, my mother was truly seeing me. I would like to know more about your company, she continued. Not to judge or critique, but to understand and appreciate what you have built. I would like that, I replied, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the dining room's temperature. Slowly, the tension that had gripped the table began to dissipate. My father suggested we move to the living room for coffee and dessert, a tacit acknowledgement that we had moved past the crisis point into something resembling reconciliation. As we gathered around the Christmas tree, the conversation shifted to genuine questions about my business. For the first time, I felt comfortable sharing the details of my work, the challenges I had overcome, and the vision I had for the future. My family listened with authentic interest, asking thoughtful questions that indicated they were finally taking my career seriously. When the time came to exchange gifts, there was a new appreciation for the thoughtfulness behind each selection. My carefully chosen presents were received with genuine emotion rather than polite acknowledgement. And when my mother opened the diamond necklace with our birthstones, she wept openly, understanding now the success that had made such a gift possible. This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me, she said, her fingers tracing the stones that represented each of her children. Not because of what it cost, but because of what it represents. Our family together, despite our differences. As the evening wound down, there was an unspoken understanding that while one conversation could not heal years of misunderstanding, we had taken an important first step toward a healthier family dynamic. Before leaving, I hugged my mother tightly. "Merry Christmas, Mom." She held on longer than usual, whispering in my ear, "I am so proud of you, Jelena. I always have been, even when I did not know how to show it." Driving home that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. The family narrative had been rewritten, and for the first time my chapter was being told accurately. The drive home from my parents' house that night was nothing like the tension-filled journey I had made countless times before. Snow had begun to fall, gently transforming the familiar route into something magical and new, much like the transformation that had occurred within my family that evening. As soon as I arrived home, I called Rachel. Despite the late hour, she answered immediately. "How bad was it?" she asked, clearly expecting the worst. "It was transformative," I replied, still processing everything myself. I recounted the evening's events, from my mother's hurtful comment to the confrontation and eventual reconciliation. Rachel listened without interrupting, gasping at appropriate moments. "I cannot believe you finally said it," she marveled when I finished. "After all these years of them taking advantage of your success while diminishing it, you actually stood up for yourself." "It was not planned," I admitted. "Something just broke inside me when she called me useless. I could handle being underestimated, but I could not bear being invisible and insulted while financially supporting the family." "So what happens now?" Rachel asked. "Honestly, I am not entirely sure. We cannot undo years of patterns with one conversation, but it feels like a genuine new beginning." The weeks following Christmas proved Rachel's question prescient. My relationship with my family did not transform overnight, but small, significant changes began to take root. My mother called 3 days after Christmas, not to ask for money or offer unsolicited advice, but to inquire about my upcoming business plans for the new year. Our conversation lasted nearly an hour, and for the first time in my adult life, she listened more than she spoke. 2 weeks later, she called again with news that surprised me. She had scheduled an appointment with a therapist. "I realized I have been carrying around my parents' judgment for decades," she explained, "projecting my unfulfilled ambitions onto you children. Especially you, Jelena. I want to understand why I did that, and how to stop." Her willingness to examine her behavior touched me deeply. It was perhaps the greatest gift she could have given me, the acknowledgement that the problem had never been my choices but her reaction to them. My father, true to his word, created a repayment plan for the money I had given them over the years. Though I insisted it was unnecessary, he was adamant. "This is not just about the money," he explained. "It is about recognizing the imbalance that existed and correcting it. Your mother and I need to take responsibility for our actions." They made their first payment the following month, accompanied by a handwritten note expressing their gratitude not just for my financial help, but for my patience with them over the years. My relationships with David and Amanda evolved as well. My brother invited me to lunch at an upscale restaurant near my office, curious to see my company's headquarters. As I gave him a tour, introducing my team and explaining our projects, I watched his perception of my work visibly shift. "This is incredible," he said, gesturing to the open workspace where designers and developers collaborated. "You have built something remarkable here, Jelena. I am sorry I never took the time to understand that before." Amanda took a different approach to reconciliation. She asked me to speak at a career day event for the women's mentorship program at her law firm. "We have doctors, lawyers, and professors scheduled," she explained, "but no entrepreneurs. These young women should hear about alternative paths to success, especially from someone who has achieved so much without following the traditional route." Standing at that podium, sharing my journey with a room full of ambitious young women, while my sister introduced me as one of the most innovative business minds I know, felt like coming full circle. Perhaps the most significant change came during a Sunday dinner at my parents' house in March. As we gathered around the table, my mother mentioned that she had run into her old friend Diana Thompson at the grocery store. She was going on and on about her daughter making partner at the accounting firm, my mother said, serving the roast chicken. And you know what I told her? I braced myself out of habit, but what came next surprised me. I told her that while that was lovely, my daughter Jelena had built a multi-million-dollar company from scratch before she was 30, created jobs for over 20 people, and was featured in Forbes magazine last month. Diana had absolutely nothing to say to that. The pride in my mother's voice was unmistakable. There was no backhanded compliment, no subtle diminishment, just genuine maternal pride. David caught my eye across the table and grinned, giving me a subtle thumbs up. That evening, as we sat in the living room after dinner, my mother brought out a dusty portfolio from the hall closet. "I want to show you something," she said, sitting beside me on the sofa. Inside were yellowed papers, carefully preserved business plans, and market analyses for the boutique chain she had dreamed of creating in her youth. "I kept these all these years," she explained, her fingers tracing the faded ink. "Sometimes I would look at them and wonder what might have been." I studied her handwritten notes and meticulous financial projections, recognizing the same attention to detail and strategic thinking that had made me successful in my own business. "You would have been amazing," I told her sincerely. She smiled, a hint of wistfulness in her eyes. "Perhaps, but now I can experience that journey through you if you will let me." "I would like that," I replied, and meant it. As spring turned to summer, our family dynamic continued to evolve. There were still occasional missteps, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But we now had the language and awareness to address them directly, rather than falling back into destructive habits. My business continued to thrive, and for the first time my family celebrated my successes as enthusiastically as they did David's and Amanda's. When we secured a contract with a major international client, my parents hosted a dinner in my honor. When Forbes included me in their 30 Under 30 list, the article was framed and hung prominently in their living room, right alongside David's medical school diploma and Amanda's law degree. Looking back on that Christmas Eve confrontation, now I realize it was never really about the money or even the recognition. It was about being seen for who I truly was, about having my choices respected even when they differed from family expectations. It was about breaking free from a narrative that no longer served any of us and creating space for a more authentic connection. The truth I have come to understand is that family relationships are constantly evolving. They require honesty, boundaries, and sometimes difficult conversations. The most valuable gift we can give our loved ones is not financial support or even unwavering agreement, but the courage to speak our truth and the willingness to hear theirs in return. My journey from family disappointment to recognized success taught me that our worth is not determined by others' perception of us. External validation, while pleasant, is ultimately less important than internal conviction. I succeeded not because my family finally recognized my achievements, but because I believed in my path, even when no one else did. This Christmas will be different. We will gather around the same table, but the dynamics have fundamentally shifted. There will be no hidden resentments, no unacknowledged contributions, no hierarchy of success. Instead, there will be authentic connection, mutual respect, and the understanding that love should never be conditional on conformity. If my story resonates with you, perhaps you too have felt unseen or undervalued by those who should support you most. Know that your worth is not diminished by others' inability to recognize it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply to stand in your truth and let the consequences unfold. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who did not see your true value? How did you handle it, and did it change your relationship? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe to hear more authentic stories about family dynamics and personal growth. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message, share it with them. Sometimes knowing we are not alone in our struggles is the greatest gift we can receive. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you are never useless just because someone fails to see your worth.